Imagine a strip of water so narrow, so exposed, and so strategically placed that if something goes wrong there, the whole world feels it. Not just one country, not just one region, the whole world. Oil prices react, shipping slows, markets panic, governments issue warnings, navies move closer, and suddenly a place most people have never seen becomes one of the most important places on Earth. This is the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow waterway between Iran and Oman that links the Persian Gulf to the open sea. At first glance, it doesn't look like much, but this passage carries an enormous share of the world's energy trade. And that is exactly why it terrifies the world. Because if this one narrow corridor is threatened, delayed, blocked, or even thrown into uncertainty, the consequences travel far beyond the Middle East. This is the true story of why the Strait of Hormuz matters so much, why the world watches it so closely, and why every crisis here feels bigger than the map itself. The Strait of Hormuz is not important because it is large. It is important because it is narrow. That is the first thing that makes it dangerous. The wider region around it holds some of the most important oil and gas exporters on Earth. But for many of them, there is only one practical sea route out, and that route runs through this strait. Tankers carrying oil from Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, the UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, and Iran move through this passage to reach global markets. That means one narrow waterway helps connect the energy system of the Persian Gulf to Asia, Europe, and beyond. In other words, the Strait of Hormuz is not just a place on a map, it is a choke point. And choke points are dangerous because they turn geography into leverage. You do not need to control an entire ocean, you only need to threaten one narrow gate. That is what makes Hormuz so powerful. And that is why people far from the Gulf still end up caring about it.
Because the effects do not stay local. If tankers hesitate, energy prices rise. If insurance costs jump, shipping costs rise with them. If governments fear escalation, markets start pricing in risk before anything has fully happened. That is how a narrow waterway becomes a global source of anxiety. But the danger is not only economic, it is also military. And that is where the fear deepens. The Strait of Hormuz sits beside Iran, and Iran has long understood the value of geography. You do not need to sink every ship to create disruption. You do not even need to shut the strait completely. Sometimes uncertainty is enough. Warnings, threats, naval incidents, sea mines, drone attacks, missile risk, confusing rules for passage. All of that can make commercial shipping slow down, reroute, or wait. And once ships begin waiting, the entire system starts to tighten. That is what makes Hormuz so unnerving. It is not only about closure, it is about vulnerability. The world does not have to see the strait fully closed to panic. It only has to see that it could become unreliable. That possibility alone is enough to shake energy markets and strategic planning. And that is exactly why this place keeps returning to global headlines. Because every regional confrontation raises the same question. What happens if Hormuz is no longer safe? That question has haunted governments for decades. The strait has been tense before. It has seen military confrontation, tanker attacks, seizures, and repeated threats tied to regional conflict and sanctions.
Again and again, the same reality returns. The world depends heavily on a passage that is difficult to replace. That is the real problem. If there were easy alternatives, Hormuz would still matter, but it would not terrify anyone. But alternatives are limited. Some oil can bypass the strait through pipelines, but not enough to remove the strategic threat completely. That means Hormuz remains a bottleneck. a place where too much depends on too little space, and bottlenecks create fear because they compress global risk into one location. That is why the Strait of Hormuz feels bigger than it looks. This is the rehook in the story, because at this point, it may sound like Hormuz is just about oil, but it is bigger than oil. Hormuz is really about how the modern world is built. We like to imagine that the global economy is massive, distributed, and resilient, and in many ways it is. But places like Hormuz reveal how fragile that confidence can be. A huge system can still depend on a narrow passage. A global market can still hinge on a local crisis. Entire countries can still be affected by events happening in one channel of water between two coastlines. That is why the strait feels psychologically powerful. It exposes dependence. It shows that the world is more connected and more vulnerable than most people realize. And once you understand that, the place becomes more unsettling. Because Hormuz is not just a route, it is a test of how much risk the world can tolerate. And recently, that test has become more serious again. Renewed tensions in and around the strait have disrupted maritime traffic and pushed shipping companies, energy markets, and governments into a far more anxious posture. Even when the waterway is not fully shut, the atmosphere around it can become restrictive enough to slow movement and raise global concern. That tells you everything you need to know. The fear is not theoretical anymore when ships stop moving normally. The fear becomes measurable. And once it becomes measurable, the entire world starts paying attention. There is another reason the Strait of Hormuz feels so dangerous. It is visually underwhelming. That may sound strange, but it matters. Some of the world's most dangerous places look dramatic. Battlefields, volcanoes, collapsed cities, disaster zones. Hormuz does not need that. Its danger comes from what passes through it, what surrounds it, and what can happen there. A calm surface can hide enormous consequences. A tanker moving through open water may look routine, but that routine carries global significance. And that contrast makes the place even more unsettling. Because the world depends on something that does not look extraordinary. Just a narrow waterway, ships, coastlines, navigation lanes. And yet the pressure concentrated there is immense. That is what makes it terrifying. Not spectacle, pressure. Hormuz is a place where commerce, military power, geography, and energy dependence all collide in a very small space. And when too many forces collide in too little room, small disruptions can become major shocks. That is why governments watch it constantly. That is why analysts track it constantly. That is why traders react to it instantly. Not because the place is mysterious, but because it is brutally clear. Too much of the world still passes here. In the end, the Strait of Hormuz terrifies the world for a simple reason. It turns geography into global leverage. A narrow passage near one of the most unstable strategic zones on Earth helps carry a huge share of the energy that powers modern life. That means every threat feels bigger, every confrontation feels more dangerous, every slowdown feels more expensive. Hormuz is not frightening because it is dramatic. It is frightening because it is essential. And essential places become terrifying when they are vulnerable. That is why the world keeps watching this strip of water. Because if it holds, the system keeps moving. And if it doesn't, the consequences do not stay in the Gulf. They spread everywhere. If you enjoy strange places, strategic choke points, forgotten geography, and real stories that shape the world, subscribe to Strange Places Explained for more.